Right. Thank you very much, Dirk. And just to say, I heartily agree with everything Nick's just said. So let me now share my screen. My plan really is to speak as an economist. I say I agree entirely with what Nick's just said, but as an economist, I want to give you some reasons why we should move closer to help solve some of our economic problems. Help, I underline, not actually solve them. Now, the first thing is that we, generally speaking, most people agree with what the Centre for European Reform have said, is that the UK economy would be about 5% bigger if we had remained in the EU, or 5% smaller than if we'd remained. So that follows from that tax receipts, tax revenues are only now about 95% of what would have been if we'd remained in the EU. And I'm going to give you quite a lot of numbers, which is why I think Dirk was right to say you can have all these slides and think about them. So those are the numbers. These numbers are, forget about whether it's billions, it's just 1138. Don't worry about the billions at all. The fact is that there is also in the background, and this is what I do a lot, the fact that the City of London and the financial services sector, which contributes about 75 to 100 billion of tax revenues, so about 10% of that amount, the slow burn of their move is still underway. And so in the next few years, there will be another sort of 30-ish, shall we say, 30 billion coming off that total, which is a bit worrying. However, when I thought about this for this presentation, I realized that the scale of the deterioration, the malaise which has settled on the UK, isn't just 5%. There's something else at work. And this is why, well, as Nick has said, the army is diminished. I see these comments that it only got enough ammunition to fight for a couple of weeks. The doctors are leaving the NHS. It's in permanent crisis. Councils are going bust all over the place, 6 already. 1 in 10 are worried about going bust this year. 50% may be bust within 5 years. The health service, they've said there's just a permanent crisis about everywhere and everything in the UK. So why is this? And I want to focus on a little bit of public spending, so the other side of the tax revenues. And when in preparing for this, and I know this is a deeply technical commentary, so very little, and it's remarkable how little has been commented and said about the rise in the interest paid on the national debt. So here we have the OBR, Office of Budgetary Responsibility, their comments with last month's budget, showing that the cost of the national debt in 2021 was 20-something billion, and last year it's just over 100. So that's something over 90 billion increase in public spending, which is compulsory. There's no question of saying we won't pay the interest on government bonds. This is a compulsory rise, and that is a huge rise. 10% of tax revenues suddenly have been preempted to spend on debt interest. So there's something else got to happen, something else has to give. Now, when we look at what the numbers are behind this, I'm sorry about the mechanics. German government bonds have risen from 0.2 at in 2016 at the referendum to 2.5, 2.41. Ours have gone from 0.75 to 4.08 as a yield. That's a big increase. That spread between the two, the difference between the two has gone up a lot. Bank rate, and I'll explain the significance of this. The ECB rate was 0, it's now 4.5. Ours was 1/4, it's now 5.25. So the rate has gone up quite a lot. Inflation, the latest inflation figures are down here, and you can see the UK is 3.8%, and the EU's latest figure for February just came out this morning, it's 2.4%. So those are the basic numbers in the background for public debt and the interest cost. Now, this is the problem. 1/4 of UK government bonds, gilts, are what's called index linked. So the interest paid by the government, paid by us, rises in line with the consumer price index, not the rate of inflation, the index. So it's permanent. Now, if UK inflation were the same as the EU, that interest charge would be about 10 billion lower than it is today. And I made the comment there that it's gone up 90 billion in the last 2 years. But what is really staggering, and I hadn't realized this, I should have done, is the effect of quantitative easing, QE. Now, I'm sorry about the technicalities. The Bank of England purchased fixed rate gilts which paid 3 to 4% a year. And they did it by paying with their own money, banknotes as it were, which only cost about 0.25% until the rates rose last year. So up until 2022, the bank paid the Treasury £124 billion. That's a nice little earner. It's an amazing sum. I couldn't believe it when I first read it. But there is a problem. Now that the interest rates have shot up to 5.25%, the bank is not paying the Treasury. It's got to be paid by the Treasury to make the payments on its money. And so in the past, just 6 months, it suddenly turned around to being the Treasury is paying the bank 15 billion, so 30 billion annually. Now, if the UK had the same difference between the ECB's rate and the bank rate, the cost of QE would be about £5 billion lower. So between the two, there's an extra cost of interest in that huge number I showed you of about 15 billion, which is to do with our leaving the EU. That's what's happened. Now, this is my last point. And here we have, you can be your own Chancellor of the Exchequer. I've listed there the public spending, all the amounts, public spending 1,226 billion, of which those are the items all the way down there. Now, remember the current receipts, the tax revenues in the coming year, this is for the year ahead from the budget, is 1138. So there's a gap there. We're going to spend more. It's the budget deficit. Now, had there been no Brexit and the economy was 5% bigger, we'd have 1199, the 61 billion, rather than that 1138. Now, with the that extra money, plus the fact that we wouldn't have had to spend 15 billion on extra interest costs, there would have been 76 billion pounds to spend on your priorities. And that's why I invite you to be your own Chancellor of the Exchequer. I've put in there this year's debt interest. A few years ago, at 109, it used to be 20-ish. It didn't even feature. And now it's the fourth biggest item. And remember from that OBR chart, it's going to come down a bit on their expectations, a little bit in the next couple of years, but then go back up again. So this is a permanent, fundamental problem. And this is where you can play as your Chancellor. You can decide, if you were Nick, I'm sure you'd say, we'd spend all that 76 billion on defense, more or less double it. Wouldn't that be nice? If you're interested in houses, that would buy you 250,000 additional houses of the average price every year. Every year. These are the numbers. With, of course, you could solve all your health crisis problems and education and so forth. So this leaving the EU in the combination of the lower tax revenues from lower activity than otherwise would be the case, plus this incredible debt interest and the rise in it, which would be less, still be formidable, but less if we were in the EU. That is what is so powerful in saying we need to get closer to the EU, get the extra growth, the extra 61 billion, whatever, back, and that won't be easy, and hopefully get debt interest charges down. But they are there, and they preempt a huge slice of the options for public activity. That's why the country feels this incredible malaise across so many parts of society, and will continue. There's no easy way out of this. The Brexiteers have burnt the boats behind them in no uncertain terms. We can debate whether there's a policy error by the Bank of England in QE, or whether this amazing quarter of gilts are index linked, and so there's this huge vulnerability to inflation. They're past. They're done. So I am going to stop at that and leave you to ponder, spread out your own Brexit bonanza, as it were, but it'll be a decade before we get it, make no mistake, on these different categories of public spending. But thank you for your attention.